The entire context of what makes a company valuable has, well, it's just turned completely upside down.
Which brings us to the core of what we're unpacking today. I mean, if you look at the market capitalization of the biggest entities on Earth right now, the crown doesn't go to who designs the sleekest smartphone anymore.
No, definitely not.
And it isn't about electric vehicles either, and those software empires. You know, the ones built on office suites or web browsers or desktop operating systems.
Those just feel like relics from a bygone era now.
Yeah.
They are literally the toys of the last century.
Right.
Today, heavy, power-hungry hardware that actively runs the mind of the machine that is the paramount component of market capitalization, period.
Yeah, the organizations that own the physical infrastructure of artificial intelligence, they basically own the global economy.
And that undeniable reality, well, that's what led us to the research we're synthesizing for you today.
We're pulling from a really fascinating stack of intelligence here. We've got bleeding-edge silicon engineering white papers, institutional Wall Street financial projections, and real-time data center capacity metric.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Satoshi.
And I'm Satoshi.
So our mission today is to walk you through a rather mind-bending synthesis of that research. It presents this deceptively simple but completely revolutionary framework for evaluating Google's true worth.
And this is incredibly urgent right now because Google just launched their 8th generation Tensor Processing Units, the TPU-8T and the TPU-8i.
Yeah, and these specific chips are currently locked in this brutal hardware war against NVIDIA's highly anticipated Vera Rubin superchip.
It's honestly the defining technological conflict of the agentic computing era.
It really is. But here is the hook. Here's the rabbit hole we're jumping into today. This financial model we found in the research, this incredibly detailed logical breakdown of Google's various empires, it values Google search at $0.
$0.
Nothing. Nada. I mean, the most lucrative cash-generating engine in the history of the internet, and it's valued as if it doesn't even exist.
It's wild to think about.
It's insane, and the destination we are heading toward. I promise you, by the end of our conversation, you will understand exactly why, based purely on their underlying hardware and conglomerate structure, Google's stock price arguably should be $800 a share tomorrow morning.
Yeah, when the market opens, but to justify an $800 share price, especially while pretending their primary cash cow doesn't exist well, that requires some rigorous architectural support.
So where do we start?
The foundation of this entire premise rests on a financial concept called sum of the parts valuation model, or SOTP for short.
Okay, SOTP. Let's avoid treating this like a spreadsheet readout, though. How does an SOTP model actually function in practice?
Think of it as a forced corporate unbundling. Instead of evaluating Alphabet, the parent organization, as just one monolithic blob of mixed revenue, the research takes a scalpel to it.
Okay, so slicing it up.
Exactly, carves the company up into its distinct business units. It pretends for a moment that each one is a completely independent, publicly traded entity.
Yeah.
Then it benchmarks those isolated pieces against the standalone companies that are currently dominating those respective industries.
Okay, I follow the logic. It's kind of like evaluating a legendary rock band, right? Not by their collective record sales, but by asking what the lead singer, the drummer, and the bassist would each be worth if they just launched solo careers today.
That is a perfect way to put it. Now, to prevent this from being just some wildly optimistic fantasy, the research applies a pretty severe handicap.
Handicap, like what?
For every single one of Google's carved-out divisions, the model slashes their comparative valuation in half. It applies a massive 50% challenger discount.
Wait, really? Why penalize them that heavily? I mean, if a division makes a competitive product, shouldn't it be valued competitively?
You'd think so, but the incumbent market leader doesn't just have a great product. They possess secondary defensive moats.
Moats? Like what kind of moats?
Think of Tesla's massive supercharger network, or Amazon's global fulfillment warehouses. You can't just match their software and assume you capture all their value.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the discount accounts for the immense friction of taking on an entrenched king.
Okay, let's play this out then. I want to guess the benchmarks. If we carve out Google's traditional consumer hardware, like the Pixel phones, the Chromebooks, the wearables, the obvious benchmark there is Apple, right?
Correct. Apple's market cap in this snapshot sits well north of $4 trillion.
But Apple has unparalleled brand loyalty and an ecosystem that locks users in incredibly tight, so I understand the discount there. We cut Apple's $4 trillion in half. That gives Google's consumer hardware division an implied standalone value of roughly $2.01 trillion.
Spot on. Next up, let's carve out the software suite. Chrome, Workspace, the enterprise cloud applications.
The natural rival there is Microsoft. They're hovering around $3.2 trillion. But again, Microsoft has decades of enterprise sales relationships,
Deep Windows integration that Google lacks, exactly.
Right, so we cut it in half, and Google's software division is worth $1.61 trillion.
Moving right down the line, cloud infrastructure, the raw bare metal data centers.
That's Amazon Web Services. Amazon is roughly at $2.6 trillion, heavily fortified by their e-commerce logistics, like you mentioned. 50% of that puts Google's cloud infrastructure at $1.29 trillion.
Then we have the other bets, which are honestly rapidly becoming core businesses. Autonomous driving, Waymo.
Now, this one is tricky. The benchmark obviously has to be Tesla, sitting at $1.25 trillion. But I want to pause here for a second.
Sure, what's up?
Because I've driven near a Waymo, and I've used Tesla's full self-driving. They are fundamentally different approaches to the problem. Why are they directly comparable?
Well, the research acknowledges this technological divide, actually. Tesla relies almost exclusively on a vision-based neural network.
Right, cameras.
Yeah, they feed millions of hours of camera footage into their training models, hoping the system just learns to mimic human driving naturally. It's super software-heavy and very sensor-light.
And Waymo's the opposite, right?
Waymo, conversely, uses a complex fusion of hardware. They use LiDAR, which shoots laser pulses out to build a perfect 3D topological map of the surroundings, combined with radar and cameras.
So Waymo is actively mapping the physical geometry of the street in real time, while Tesla is essentially just trying to interpret a 2D video feed.
Yes. And the general consensus in the engineering white papers is that Waymo is technologically much further ahead in achieving true Level 4 autonomy.
Level 4 meaning no human driver required, ever, within a geofenced area, right?
Exactly. No steering wheel needed. However, Tesla possesses the massive manufacturing capability to pump out millions of vehicles themselves. Waymo has to buy cars from Jaguar and retrofit them with their tech.
Ah, I get it. So Tesla's secondary moat is the physical assembly line itself.
Precisely. So applying the Challenger discount to Tesla's $1.25 trillion gives Waymo an implied standalone value of $625 billion.
Wow. Okay, what about YouTube? The benchmark there is obviously Netflix.
Yeah, Netflix is estimated around $350 billion. They own a proprietary library of prestige content that is just incredibly hard to replicate. Have that, and YouTube's standalone value is $175 billion.
Okay, but we are missing the crown jewel here. The primary reason we are even having this conversation today. AI hardware, the custom silicon division building the TPUs.
The benchmark for AI hardware in 2026 is undisputed. It's NVIDIA. Their market cap is approaching $5 trillion. I mean, they're the sun around which the current tech economy orbits.
Okay, so if we assume Google's hardware division is merely a challenger to NVIDIA, and we apply that brutal 50% discount, the implied value of Google's AI silicon alone is $2.46 trillion. Just for the chips.
So run the final calculation. Add it all up.
I'm looking at these numbers right now. $2.46 trillion for AI hardware, $2.01 for consumer hardware, $1.61 for the suite, $1.29 for cloud infrastructure, $625 billion for Waymo, $175 billion for YouTube. If I add those independent pieces together, the total is $8.17 trillion.
$8.17 trillion.
But here is where the entire map catches fire. I'm looking at the actual market data. Google's real-world market cap in the 2026 data is only around $4.10 trillion.
Right.
Are the public markets malfunctioning? How can a model that brutally slashes every single division's value in half still state out a number that is double the company's actual trading price?
What you are witnessing there is a very well-documented financial phenomenon. It's known as the conglomerate discount.
Explain that, because it sounds totally counterintuitive. Shouldn't a diverse company be worth more?
You would think so, yeah. But financial markets actually despise complexity.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. When a tech empire becomes this expansive, the market actively struggles to price the distinct risk profiles of its various engines.
So they just punish the stock.
Essentially. An investor who wants pure exposure to AI hardware might buy NVIDIA, right? But they hesitate to buy Alphabet because they don't necessarily want exposure to the advertising market or, consumer smartphones.
Oh, that makes sense.
The diverse parts obscure the underlying power. The market essentially penalizes the parent company for its own sprawling scale.
Let me try to visualize this. Imagine walking into a high-end dealership and buying this flawlessly engineered million-dollar hypercar. The market prices the assembled vehicle at $1 million.
Okay, I'm with you.
But if you take that car into a garage and meticulously dismantle it, like you pull out the custom-tuned engine and sell it to a racing syndicate, you remove the carbon fiber chassis and sell it to an aerospace firm, you rip out the bespoke entertainment system and sell it to an audiophile company.
Right.
The individual components sell for $2 million combined.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. The sum of the isolated parts is perceived as vastly more valuable than the tangled, assembled whole.
And we still haven't discussed the most baffling part of this financial paradox. We just priced the engine, the chassis, and the stereo. But we deliberately ignored the most valuable component in the vehicle. We didn't price the fuel tank.
The research intentionally leaves search entirely off the table.
Search is the undisputed global monopoly of information retrieval. I mean, it brings over $60 billion in cash flow every single quarter. It is the limitless financial reservoir that subsidizes all of these expensive challenger bets in hardware, autonomy, and infrastructure.
And yet,
And this model says, pretend it is worth zero. And even without it, Alphabet's infrastructure is still worth double its current trading price. It's wild.
it really forces a profound perspective shift, doesn't it? You can no longer view Alphabet as a search engine company. In 2026, they are a planetary-scale silicon and infrastructure conglomerate that simply uses a search engine to pay their utility bills.
To understand why that infrastructure is valued so highly, specifically why the market could theoretically assign a $2.46 trillion premium just to their AI hardware division, we really need to examine the physical silicon. We have to understand the battlefield.
And to understand the silicon, we have to define the era we are currently navigating. The research explicitly refers to 2026 as the maturation of the agentic era.
I hear agentic era, and my mind immediately jumps to, like, science fiction. Autonomous programs running wild. Ground this for me. What does that actually mean in practice?
Contrast it with how we interacted with AI just a few years ago. In the early 2020s, AI was fundamentally a call and response mechanism.
Right, like chatbots.
Exactly. You typed a prompt into a text box, the model processed it, and it spit out a poem, a recipe, or a snippet of code. And the interaction ended right there. It was a discrete, isolated transaction.
Like consulting an incredibly well-read oracle. You ask a question, you get an answer, the oracle goes back to sleep.
Precisely. But in the agentic era, AI does not go to sleep. We are deploying agents capable of persistent, multi-step reasoning.
So they keep working.
Yes, you don't just ask an agent for a recipe anymore. You give it a high-level goal, like plan a vacation to Kyoto within a $3,000 budget.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The agent then autonomously breaks that goal into subtasks. It browses flight aggregators, it analyzes layover times, it checks hotel availabilities against review sentiments. Then it realizes its first itinerary went over budget, so it refines its own search parameters, drafts an email with 3 options, and just waits for your approval.
So it is actively holding a train of thought, utilizing external tools, and iterating on its own mistakes over a prolonged period. That's incredible.
It is. And that operational shift moving from instantaneous text generation to prolonged autonomous task execution, it completely shattered the old paradigm of how we design the underlying processors.
How so?
For years, the industry relied on general-purpose accelerators, a single, powerful chip that could handle a bit of everything decently well.
The era of the one-size-fits-all chip.
Which is now totally obsolete. Because the workload demands of the agentic era have violently bifurcated, the process has split into 2 fundamentally different mathematical and thermodynamic problems.
Okay, what's the first one?
On one end, you have the training phase. To build a frontier model from scratch, you must feed it unfathomable oceans of data and force it to find patterns over the course of several months. Training requires relentless, brute force, scale-out throughput.
Heavy lifting. And on the other end,
Inference. Once the model is trained, you have to serve it to millions of users who are simultaneously running these continuous agentic tasks.
right, the real-world application.
Exactly. Inference doesn't require crunching the whole internet. It requires ultra-low latency, the ability to instantly recall context, and the efficiency to juggle trillions of parameters without drawing enough power to dim the lights of the host city.
So training is about raw muscle, and inference is about reflexes and memory. And this bifurcation, this is where Google and NVIDIA looked at the exact same industry problem and chose 2 radically divergent engineering philosophies.
It's a great hardware divergence. Google recognized this split and decided to physically split their architecture. The TPU-8 roadmap diverged into two distinct species of silicon.
Tell me about the first one.
They engineered the TPU-8T, codenamed Sunfish, explicitly and exclusively for the grueling marathon of massive pre-training. Concurrently, they designed the TPU-8I, codenamed Zebrafish, a chip engineered purely for real-time reasoning and serving those active agents.
Two hyper-specialized tools for two very different jobs. But NVIDIA didn't follow suit, did they?
NVIDIA took the exact opposite path with their Vera Rubin platform. They doubled down on the converged powerhouse philosophy. They designed the Rubin R100 to be a single, unimaginably dense, ultra-flexible superchip that attempts to excel at absolutely everything.
I'm visualizing this like a track and field team. Google looked at the demanding events and decided to draft two highly specialized athletes. They recruited a hyper-efficient marathon runner for the endurance demands of training, and they recruited a dedicated explosive sprinter for the rapid-fire demands of inference.
And NVIDIA.
NVIDIA decided they only needed one athlete. They drafted the ultimate genetically engineered decathlete, a massive, muscular giant who can run the marathon, sprint the 100-meter dash, throw the javelin, and do it all at an incredibly elite level without ever needing to sub out.
That analogy captures the strategic divide perfectly. And the trillion-dollar question the market is trying to answer is this. In an economy defined by relentless compounding scale, does the hyper-specialized tool ultimately defeat the brilliant generalist?
You know, it's funny, we are talking about the advantages of being hyper-specialized and breaking away from bloated traditional methods. Because creating a specialized, distraction-free environment is the exact philosophy behind how we deliver this research to you.
The current state of the web is incredibly hostile to deep focus, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, when you try to read a complex white paper online today, you're battling a barrage of pop-ups, behavioral trackers, auto-playing videos, and paywall logins. It just shatters your concentration. So we designed the Deep Dive Research Hub to be the exact opposite.
A clean slate.
Exactly. We stripped away everything that doesn't serve the text. There are zero trackers monitoring your cursor. There are no cookies harvesting your data. There is no account creation required. It is a pure, unadulterated reading experience the way the internet was supposed to be.
And it solves the problem of constant connectivity, which is ironically what these AI agents rely on.
Yes, because thanks to new tech, we utilized progressive web app technology. So you don't even need to be online to read our syntheses. You can install the Deep Dive site directly from your browser onto your PC, tablet, or phone. It functions identically to a native app.
It caches the research locally for offline reading.
Which means you can board a cross-country flight, put your device in airplane mode, and spend 4 hours immersed in our technical breakdowns without paying exorbitant fees for unreliable airplane Wi-Fi. You can sit on a remote beach without a cell tower in sight and retain full access to the library. We want you untethered. The link to explore that is right down in the description.
It really transforms how you absorb complex information.
So now that we have our website offline, let's turn our focus back to how Google absorbs and processes complex information. Let's look closely at the actual chips powering the cloud. We have the marathon runner, the sprinter, and the decathlete. But let's establish a ground rule right now.
I know where you're going. No complex mathematical equations.
No equations. If we start reading out metrics and bandwidth integers, eyes will just glaze over. We're going to translate the physics of this silicon into concepts we can actually picture in the real world.
Agreed. Let's begin with Google's marathon runner, the TPU-8T, the Sunfish. This is the training powerhouse. The engineering white papers emphasize that the singular goal of the 8T architecture is to minimize the duration of frontier model training from months down to mere weeks.
That's a huge jump.
It is. To achieve this, they optimize for a metric known as good put.
Good put. It sounds like a fabricated corporate buzzword.
It does, but it's actually a vital efficiency ratio.
Yeah.
Good put measures the amount of productive mathematical computing time against the total time the server is powered on.
Oh, I see.
Because here's the dirty secret of traditional AI training. The main processor spends an agonizing percentage of its life doing absolutely nothing.
Really? Nothing.
It sits completely idle, burning power, simply waiting for necessary data to arrive from the memory banks.
Ah, so the processor is faster than the delivery mechanism. And Google addressed this bottleneck with a physical addition called the sparse core, right?
Yes, the sparse core is a dedicated secondary piece of silicon integrated directly onto the chip, engineered specifically to handle irregular, chaotic data retrieval, such as embedding lookups.
Let's build a visual for this. Imagine the primary processor of the chip is a world-renowned head chef operating in a chaotic Michelin star kitchen. Their sole responsibility is to chop ingredients, manage the heat, and execute complex recipes. That represents the heavy calculation work.
Go the core math?
But in a standard architecture, this brilliant head chef constantly has to put down their knife, walk away from the stove, navigate into a massive disorganized pantry, and search for a very specific, obscure jar of saffron.
And while the chef is rummaging through the pantry,
The stove goes cold. No cooking is happening. That idle time represents terrible goodput.
the sparse core fundamentally changes that kitchen dynamic. It acts as a highly trained, dedicated assistant chef whose only job is to sprint into that disorganized pantry, locate the exact spices required for the next step of the recipe, and place them directly into the head chef's hand at the exact millisecond they are needed.
Wow. So the head chef never leaves the stove. The pan never stops sizzling. The math never stops executing.
That is the sparse core advantage in a nutshell. It keeps the main units perpetually fed. But Google didn't stop there. They paired that continuous feed with native support for a data format called FP4, which is a profound leap in computational density.
FP4 stands for 4-bit floating point, correct?
Yes, it does.
I want to make sure I understand the mechanics of this, because to be honest, it sounds like a downgrade. For years, the industry bragged about 16-bit or 8-bit precision. Why would moving to a 4-bit format be an advantage?
To understand FP4, you have to understand quantization. When an AI neural network learns, it assigns weights to different connections. Historically, these weights were stored as highly precise long strings of numbers, like a coordinate with 10 decimal places.
Okay.
Storing and transferring those massive numbers requires significant physical space on the chip and immense energy.
It is like writing an epic novel where every single word is penned in elaborate, oversized, time-consuming calligraphy. It looks beautiful, sure, but the book ends up being 1,000 pages long and weighs 10 pounds. It takes enormous effort just to pass it back and forth.
Exactly. Moving to a 4-bit format means you only have 16 possible values to represent that weight instead of thousands. Critics initially thought clamping the numbers down to such a limited range would destroy the AI's accuracy, effectively making the model dumb.
So how does it retain the accuracy then, if it's losing all that detail?
Through brilliant statistical mapping, engineers realized you don't actually need the exact precise number, you just need to preserve the distribution of the weights. The chip identifies the most critical parts and maps them to those 16 available values, basically discarding the microscopic variances that don't actually impact the final output.
Going back to the book analogy, it is like the chip learned how to rewrite that 1,000-page calligraphy novel using a highly dense, incredibly efficient shorthand.
Yeah.
The actual narrative, the nuance, and the meaning of the story remain entirely intact. The reader still cries at the end. But the physical book is now a lightweight paperback you can just slide in your back pocket.
The narrative meaning is preserved, but the physical space required to store the parameters and the electrical energy required to shuttle them across the silicon is drastically reduced. Sunfish is a chef who never stops cooking, reading recipes written in hyper-efficient shorthand.
That covers the endurance training. What about the sprinter, the zebrafish, the TPU AI designed for inference? What specific problem is it trying to solve?
The zebrafish was engineered to conquer a completely different physical limitation known as the memory wall. When you are executing inference, when millions of agentic programs are actively asking the model to reason, plan, and recall, the bottleneck has nothing to do with raw mathematical speed.
Really?
No, the processor is screaming fast. The bottleneck is the physical distance. The data must travel from the memory modules to the compute cores.
So the processor is starving because the supply lines are too long.
The math happens near the speed of light, but the data delivery feels like it is arriving via horse-drawn carriage. To demolish this wall, Google fundamentally altered the physical layout of the zebrafish chip. They dedicated a shocking amount of the silicon real estate to on-chip SRAM.
Static random access memory.
Yep.
This is the memory that is physically etched directly alongside the processor rather than residing on a separate chip next door, correct?
Yes. It is the fastest, most power-efficient, and easily the most expensive real estate in the entire computing landscape. The TPU-8i incorporates a volume of SRAM that represents a massive threefold increase over their previous generation.
I want to visualize this constraint. Think of a master mechanic tasked with rebuilding a complex engine. If that mechanic constantly has to walk all the way across the shop floor, open a heavy door, and search through a separate storage garage every time they need a different socket wrench, the rebuild will take weeks.
Every footstep is latency.
Exactly. That long walk represents fetching data from traditional off-chip memory. By etching all that SRAM directly onto the processor die, Google essentially built a sprawling, custom workbench that wraps entirely around the engine block.
I love that.
Every single tool, every manual, every diagnostic wire the mechanic could possibly need is literally within arm's reach. They never have to take a single step away from the project.
And in the realm of the agentic era, the most critical tool sitting on that immediate workbench is something called the KV cache.
The key value cache. Explain why that specific component is so vital for autonomous agents.
The KV cache is the working short-term memory of an ongoing AI interaction. Imagine you upload a 50-page legal contract to an agent and ask it to find loopholes based on a previous conversation you had an hour ago.
Okay, a complex task.
The agent has to retain the context of the contract and the history of your specific instructions simultaneously. That retained context is stored in the KV cache.
If the agent has to walk back to the storage garage every time it needs to remember what was written on page 2 of the contract, the entire reasoning process bogs down. The agent becomes sluggish, frustrating, and functionally useless for real-time tasks.
But because Zebrafish possesses such a vast expanse of on-chip SRAM, it can host the entire KV cache for these massive models directly on the silicon die itself. The latency just evaporates. The agent can hold a complex, multi-layered chain of thought instantly, allowing it to reason and execute without hesitation.
Okay, so we've outlined the specialized logic of Google's split architecture, the marathon runner optimizing for goodput and shorthand math, the sprinter optimizing for immediate memory recall. But we must address the decathlete in the room, the NVIDIA Vera Rubin R100.
The R100 is a leviathan. It fundamentally rejects the premise of splitting workloads. It attempts to overwhelm the limitations of physics through sheer brute force engineering, massive transistor density, and unparalleled bandwidth.
The research indicates they are packing hundreds of billions of microscopic transistors onto a slice of silicon no larger than a coaster. It's almost incomprehensible.
The defining triumph of the Rubin platform is its memory architecture. It is the first major platform to fully integrate HBM4 memory.
High bandwidth memory, Generation 4. The numbers associated with its transfer speeds are, well, we promise no math. How do we conceptualize this bandwidth advantage over what Google is doing?
If we envision the flow of data back and forth as vehicles traveling on a highway network,
Let's say Google's TPU architecture utilizes a highly efficient, perfectly paved 8-lane superhighway. Traffic moves smoothly.
upgrading to HBM4 on the Rubin platform isn't just a matter of adding a few more lanes to that highway. It is the equivalent of taking that 8-lane superhighway and vertically stacking 10 more identical highways directly on top of it.
Wait, really?
Yes, creating a towering monolithic corridor of infrastructure.
A skyscraper of highways.
Entire populations of data can commute simultaneously in both directions without a single vehicle ever needing to tap the brakes. The bandwidth is so profound that a single Rubin chip can sustain the heavy, continuous pipeline needed for training, while instantly pivoting to serve the sporadic, high-speed memory lookups required for inference. It just throws raw capacity at the problem.
I hear that, and I have to push back a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
I am putting myself in the shoes of a chief technology officer at a major AI lab. I'm evaluating my purchasing options. I look at NVIDIA's Vera Rubin. It has the skyscraper of highways. It excels at training. It excels at inference. It is a unified, profoundly powerful decathlete. Why on earth would I choose to complicate my data center operations, my supply chain, and my software deployment by buying Google's fragmented architecture? Why manage two different types of athletes when one can win every event?
Because when you transition from the laboratory to industrial scale, raw peak performance ultimately loses to scale-out economics.
Walk me through that economic reality.
When a company like Meta or OpenAI builds infrastructure in 2026, they are not buying a handful of chips. They are procuring tens of thousands of them simultaneously. The Vera Rubin is a masterpiece, undeniably, but it is priced as a masterpiece. You are paying the premium for the complete decathlete in every single server rack. If you are building a server farm whose sole purpose is to serve inference to end users, if you only need the hardware to sprint, you are still forced to pay the massive financial premium for the Rubin chip's ability to throw the javelin and run the marathon. You are paying for heavy matrix multiplication cores that will just sit dormant.
So you are buying expensive, dormant capabilities simply because they are permanently attached to the memory bandwidth you actually need.
Precisely. Google's bifurcated architecture allows for surgical capital expenditure. You purchase Sunfit exclusively for your dedicated training clusters. You purchase Zebrafish exclusively for your frontline serving clusters. You only pay for the exact silicon you intend to utilize at full capacity.
That makes a lot of financial sense.
However, there is a secondary engineering hurdle that makes the single-chip philosophy so daunting:
And this brings us to the physical constraints of networking and heat.
the nervous system and the furnace. A single, isolated chip, no matter how powerful, is functionally useless for frontier AI. These organizations must string together hundreds of thousands of chips to create a unified computing cluster.
Right.
Orchestrating that communication without causing catastrophic data collisions is the greatest networking challenge of our generation.
The research details Google's proprietary networking fabric, known as Virgo.
The Virgo fabric is a mega-scale interconnect, capable of linking up to 134,000 individual TPUs into a single cohesive hive mind.
134,000 separate brains attempting to whisper to each other simultaneously. The sheer volume of digital chatter must be deafening. How do you prevent gridlock?
By tailoring the physical shape, the topology of the network to the specific chip. Because Google split the chips, they can split the network topology. For the 8T training clusters, they employ a structural layout called a 3D torus.
Let's visualize the 3D torus. Why is it ideal for training?
During pre-training, data flows in massive, predictable, sequential blocks. The 3D torus is essentially a ring of rings. Imagine a perfectly planned, sprawling grid city extending in 3 dimensions. Every intersection is a processor. If a packet of data needs to move, it travels uniformly down the avenues and across the streets. It is incredibly robust, reliable, and prevents bottlenecks when you are moving continuous, heavy freight.
So training relies on the predictable grid city. But what about inference? What topology connects the zebrafish chips?
Inference data does not flow sequentially. It is chaotic, sporadic, and demands instant access between random nodes. For zebrafish, Google deploys a topology called boardfly, which is a variation of a butterfly network.
How does boardfly differ from the grid?
If the 3D torus is a surface-level grid city, the boardfly topology is like boring a network of high-speed express subway tunnels directly beneath the city. These tunnels bypass the local streets entirely, providing dedicated direct connections between distant hubs. It allows unpredictable inference requests to cut across the entire cluster instantly, halving the travel distance and minimizing latency.
So Google uses the grid for heavy freight and the express subway for instant delivery. And how does NVIDIA handle the networking for the converged Rubin chips?
NVIDIA utilizes their proprietary NVLink 6 protocol combined with the Spectrum-X Ethernet fabric. NVLink essentially tricks the cluster into acting like one giant processor by creating a unified pool of shared memory. It is the gold standard of the industry, incredibly fast, and elegantly avoids traffic jams.
But I want to pivot here for a second, because when we discuss topologies, fabrics, and the cloud, we fall into a linguistic trap. We use terminology that sounds invisible, ethereal, and weightless.
It is the greatest misnomer in modern technology.
The cloud is not weightless. The cloud is heavily grounded in physics. It is comprised of sprawling warehouses filled with massive, screaming, intensely hot physical machines. And considering the sheer density of transistors we just discussed, the thermal output must be pushing the limits of material science.
You have hit upon the absolute ceiling of the 2026 hardware cycle. We are officially witnessing the end of air cooling.
Wait, really? We can no longer rely on fans to blow cold air over the heat sinks.
Not even close. Air simply cannot absorb and transport the heat away rapidly enough. The research examines the thermal dynamics of the NVIDIA NVL72 rack. This is a single, towering metal cabinet that integrates dozens of the new Rubin GPUs alongside custom CPUs.
What is the thermal output of that single cabinet?
It generates over 400,000 British thermal units of heat per hour.
400,000 BTU per hour from one rack. Let's make that visceral for a moment. What does that volume of heat actually feel like?
To give you a baseline, a heavy-duty space heater designed to warm a large living room outputs roughly 5,000 BTU.
Okay, 5,000.
This single server rack is radiating the equivalent heat of running 80 heavy-duty space heaters or several commercial pizza ovens simultaneously. Now imagine locking all of those active ovens inside a single small hallway closet.
Oh my God. The ambient temperature would ignite. The metal casings would literally melt.
If the cooling systems failed, the silicon would scorch itself into useless slag within seconds. Air cooling is physically inadequate for that energy density. The industry has been forced to adopt complex liquid cooling ecosystems.
How does that function at a micro level? Are they just submerging the boards in water?
They utilize direct-to-chip phase change cooling. Intricate copper cold plates are mounted directly against the exposed silicon die. They pump specialized dielectric fluids through microscopic channels within those plates. As the chip generates immense heat, the fluid absorbs it, vaporizes into a gas, travels away from the processor, condenses back into a liquid in a remote heat exchanger, and cycles back.
The chips are practically sweating to stay alive.
Exactly. And when you scale this thermal reality up to institutional levels, Google's SuperPod deployments link nearly 10,000 of these chips together in a single facility.
10,000 ovens.
When you construct a facility to house that kind of thermal density, you are no longer building a traditional data center. You are constructing a thermodynamic ecosystem that looks more like a power plant than a server room. The blueprints require immense dedicated water pipelines, cooling towers the size of office buildings, and heat exchangers the size of semi-trucks just to vent the exhaust into the atmosphere. The physical footprint required to support the invisible cloud is staggering.
And that immense physical footprint, the relentless requirement for chilled water and electricity, connects directly to the financial burn rate, which brings us to the staggering economics of the exascale era.
The capital expenditure is the true barrier to entry now.
Let's talk about the money. We're looking at projections stating that Alphabet will spend an estimated $185 to $185 billion in capital expenditure in the year 2026 alone.
To contextualize that, $180 billion exceeds the gross domestic product of many developed nations.
Spent entirely in a 12-month window, predominantly on silicon, concrete, and copper wire. Where's that money actually going, and how do the economics of Google's specialized chip strategy justify that level of spending?
This is where the financial analysis from the research provides a really compelling narrative. Because Google isn't simply shoveling capital into a furnace, they are executing a ruthless campaign of price-performance optimization.
Let's hear the specific claims.
According to the engineering benchmarks, the TPU-8T, the marathon runner, designed for training, delivers nearly a threefold increase in raw computational performance compared to their previous generation.
And how much more does it cost to manufacture?
It is being deployed at the exact same unit cost as the previous generation.
Wow. So developers receive triple the speed for the identical financial outlay.
Yes, and the optimization on the inference side is equally aggressive. The TPU-8i, the zebrafish, possesses such low latency that it allows enterprise clients to serve nearly twice the volume of concurrent end users without increasing their operational budget at all.
That perfectly validates the scale-out economic theory you mentioned earlier. But, theory is cheap. Do we have verifiable, real-world evidence of this? Are major tech companies actively abandoning NVIDIA to save money on Google's infrastructure?
We are seeing significant migrations. Actually, yes. The research explicitly highlights Midjourney, one of the premier AI image generation platforms. They publicly reported slashing their total compute costs by an astonishing 65% simply by migrating their workloads onto Google's TPU architecture.
A 65% reduction in core operational costs is a margin improvement that completely alters a company's financial trajectory.
And we are seeing it at the very top of the frontier model hierarchy as well. Anthropic, one of the most sophisticated AI labs in existence, secured a strategic partnership with Google Cloud. Financial analysts estimate this arrangement provides Anthropic with a 30% lower total cost of ownership compared to leasing standard, discrete GPU clusters from competing providers.
And Anthropic is building at an almost incomprehensible scale right now.
To illustrate their scale, the research notes that Anthropic recently locked down computing capacity that requires a dedicated power draw of 3.5 gigawatts.
Wait, let me pause our analysis just to marvel at the sheer physics of that number. 3.5 gigawatts. We were just discussing the heat output of industrial ovens. A gigawatt is 1 billion watts. 3.5 gigawatts of continuous electricity is enough capacity to power a sprawling, massive metropolitan city. It could sustain millions of homes. And that entire river of electricity is being routed directly into the microscopic silicon pathways of these models. The scale of this industrialization is profoundly unnerving.
It is the industrial revolution of cognitive labor, and Google is aggressively maneuvering to optimize the financial cost of that revolution. The research notes that Alphabet is succeeding in bypassing what the industry calls the NVIDIA tax.
Explain the NVIDIA tax.
It is the massive profit margin premium you must pay to acquire the Vera Rubin decathlete. NVIDIA enjoys margins that hardware companies have rarely achieved in history. Google circumvents this tax through deep, co-design partnerships with specialized silicon firms like Broadcom and Marvell. They keep the design and manufacturing margins internal. And this ruthless cost efficiency is precisely what enables them to secure landscape-altering contracts.
Which leads us to the Apple integration.
Precisely. The historic agreement to embed Google's Gemini intelligence models directly into Siri and the broader iOS ecosystem, Apple rigorously evaluated every infrastructure provider on Earth, and they determined Google's TPU backbone was the most capable of handling the inferential load of 1 billion iPhones. That single partnership was a primary catalyst in propelling Google's market cap past the $4 trillion threshold.
Because it seamlessly injects their intelligence into the pockets of the global population. But the adoption extends beyond consumer electronics. The research points out a development that we must address impartially, strictly examining the factual implications for the infrastructure. Google is reportedly in advanced discussions to integrate Gemini into the United States Department of Defense.
Correct. Specifically for deployment within classified operational uses.
And to maintain absolute neutrality here, we are simply reporting the logistical rationale provided in the research. The DoD operates the most complex supply chains of logistical networks on the planet. They are seeking to leverage this specific software architecture to drastically cut operational overhead and streamline deployment logistics efficiently. They require the most reliable, cost-effective intelligence per watt available, and they are evaluating Google's specialized TPUs to fulfill that mandate.
Which serves as the ultimate validation of Google's overarching strategy. They have relentlessly optimized every microscopic layer of their vertical stack, from the sheer procurement of a 3.5 gigawatt power grid, to the thermodynamic engineering of the liquid-cooled facilities, to the express subway topologies of the Virgo network, all the way down to the native FP4 shorthand etched into the silicon.
It is a breathtakingly efficient, entirely self-contained synthesis of raw data. They control the entire life cycle of the intelligence.
They own the entire flow.
I often marvel at that level of vertical integration because owning the entire stack, creating a frictionless process that transforms raw data into a perfectly efficient synthesis, is exactly the methodology we utilize to produce these deep dives.
It requires an intense level of internal control.
We don't just pick a topic, hit record, and hope for the best. We control our entire pipeline. It begins when you, the listener, send us raw signals and fragmented sources. We obsess over those inputs. We hunt for the hidden connective themes.
Then we initiate the heavy computational lift. We unleash Gemini Pro to execute a comprehensive 360-degree analysis of the material.
Yes, and we actively tame the AI's tangents by utilizing rigorous active prompting. We cross-validate every assertion against thousands of reliable signals. Then, the human element takes over. We handcraft and polish the research. We painfully refine every single word, compressing hours of dense analysis into the tight, no-fluff audio experience you're listening to right now.
And that vertical integration extends to the visual presentation as well.
Exactly. For the video iterations, we architect the soundscape, the mood, and the visual hierarchy. We build short motion graphics, minimalist, clean, high-contrast typography stripped of unnecessary clutter. We employ subtle geometric accents and calm, kinetic text reveals that are perfectly paced. We rely heavily on strong hierarchy and white space, utilizing a tool called Mosaic. And let me assure you, Mosaic is an absolute game changer when it comes to video. We own our stack, ensuring nothing compromises the final synthesis.
But our synthesis of the hardware landscape brings us to the ultimate friction point, the singular question that threatens the entire valuation thesis we've built.
Lay out the contradiction.
We have spent the last hour establishing a very compelling reality. Google's bifurcated hardware strategy is demonstrably cheaper. It provides higher performance for specialized tasks. It operates with ruthless thermodynamic efficiency. It powers the world's most ubiquitous smartphones and the world's most complex military logistics.
We have built a formidable case for their silicon.
If that is true, if Google possesses this incredibly cost-effective, vertically integrated, exascale silicon empire, why is NVIDIA still sitting on the throne? Why does NVIDIA continue to command a valuation nearing $5 trillion, while Google's AI hardware division is subjected to a 50% challenger discount?
It is the multi-trillion-dollar mystery. If the marathon runner and the sprinter are outperforming the decathlete on cost and efficiency, why does the decathlete still dictate the terms of the market?
Because NVIDIA is protected by a moat that has absolutely nothing to do with copper cold plates or silicon transistors. Their greatest superpower is an invisible 10-year-old software ecosystem known as CU Day.
The software moat. Let's illuminate CU Day. because it is the dark matter holding the entire AI universe together.
The general public views NVIDIA purely as a hardware manufacturer, but CU Day is not hardware. The easiest way to conceptualize CU Day is to view it as a language. It is the foundational programming interface that allows a software engineer's code to effectively communicate with the parallel processing cores of the GPU.
So the hardware is the engine, but CUDA is the steering wheel and the pedals.
Exactly. NVIDIA released CUA over a decade ago, long before the phrase generative AI was in the public consciousness. They strategically seeded this language into university computer science departments globally. They effectively built the paved roads for AI development, but they mandated that anyone driving on those roads had to utilize their proprietary dialect.
The result being that in 2026, the entire ecosystem is captured.
Every prominent AI researcher, every critical development framework like PyTorch, every open source library, they are all natively fluent in CUDA. The entire global workforce of machine learning engineers assumes the underlying hardware will understand NVIDIA's language.
Let me use our previous analogy. It is as if an incredibly innovative company just released a brand new dictionary. It is beautifully bound, the definitions are remarkably precise, and it costs 30% less than the standard dictionary.
Okay.
But there is a catch. The new dictionary is written entirely in Esperanto. You are asking an entire nation of developers to stop speaking English overnight, halt their daily operations, and learn a completely new language simply because the new dictionary is slightly cheaper.
That is the exact psychological and operational barrier. A CTO looks at Google's TPU architecture and acknowledges it is faster and cheaper, but they counter with, "My entire engineering team only speaks CUDA. I cannot afford to pause development for 6 months to rewrite our entire code base into Google software formats. The transition friction is too severe." That deeply entrenched language barrier is why NVIDIA retains the crown.
But the research implies that this moat is finally beginning to break down, doesn't it?
Google is executing a relentless siege on the moat, yes. And their weapon is that precise vertical integration we discussed. By building the chip, the network, the JAX and XLA software, and the data center so it all hums perfectly, Google is refining the translation process. They are making the software bridges so seamless and the financial incentive so overwhelming that massive entities like Anthropic are finally deciding the effort is worth the reward.
The sheer gravity of the savings is forcing the translation. Which brings us, inevitably, to the final destination we promised at the beginning of this exercise, the final valuation verdict.
We return to the $8.17 trillion sum of the parts model.
Let's lay the cards on the table. The research highlights that conventional Wall Street analysts are currently projecting a strong buy recommendation for Alphabet. Their consensus target price sits somewhere around $380 per share. And they justify that conservative target by pointing to the new 8th-generation TPUs, driving steady, predictable bumps in cloud hosting revenue.
That is the safe, unimaginative, traditional view of the map.
But the underlying mathematics, the deep rabbit hole we just excavated, suggests a reality that is vastly more profound. You argued that if the broader financial markets ever shake off the conglomerate discount, and if they truly recognize the standalone power of Google's AI hardware against NVIDIA,
then the dormant mathematics hiding in plain sight dictate that the stock should fundamentally be valued at $800 a share.
$800. And that is while maintaining the absurd premise that Google Search holds zero financial value. Because the underlying hardware, the bifurcated chips, the liquid-cooled thermodynamic ecosystems, they are no longer merely supporting the advertising business. They are the foundational substrate of the 2026 economy.
It requires a profound recalibration of how we perceive technological value.
It truly does. We are bearing witness to a fundamental tectonic shift occurring in real time. If we step back and recap the big picture we've mapped out today, we began by examining AI agents endowed with prolonged multi-step reasoning. We observed the transition from rudimentary generalist prompt responders to autonomous goal-seeking minds.
The symbiosis of specialized hardware and software is mirroring the symbiosis of human and artificial intelligence.
Exactly. We evolved from the converged generalist chip, the decathlete, to hyper-specialized focused silicon, the marathon runner and the sprinter. We've moved from generalist machines to agentic minds living in liquid-cooled, hyper-specialized silicon cities.
And as those synthetic cities expand, drawing gigawatts of power, the financial map of our world is going to be redrawn over and over again.
I have no doubt it will. This has been a genuinely incredible exploration. For everyone listening, if you find value in navigating these shifting landscapes with us, please ensure you subscribe wherever you listen. Spotify, YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, YouTube.
Or explore value for value platforms like Fountain.fm, which we highly recommend.
And more importantly, we invite you to share resources for research. Why do we ask for sources? Because the best ideas don't come from us alone. They emerge when your curiosity meets our process.
It is the only reliable method for isolating the true signal amidst the noise.
I want to quote our core mission statement verbatim. In one line, your signals are synthesis, AI acceleration, human obsession, distilled insight. That is the mission or the flow of collaborative intelligence.
Help us in creating a symbiosis of artificial and natural intelligence. Particularly based on the engineering challenges we discussed today, if you have expertise in liquid cooling infrastructure, advanced silicon fabrication, or massive scale network topologies, we want to hear from you.
Let's construct the new map together. Keep searching, keep the quest on. See you on the next deep dive. I'm Satosha.
And I'm Satoshi.